neutral service providers will not discriminate on the basis of anything except for conservative politics. Okay, this is why the story that is now coming out about PayPal and the Anti-Defamation League is scary. Neutral spaces disappear, and that means further polarization and split in the country. Today's story from the authoritarian front lines. This is an insane story, but this is the way the country is going to go. Neutral service providers. These are places that just used to provide you services. This is how you think of most of the businesses with which you engage in everyday life. Your insurance company is a neutral service provider. It is supposed to provide you service regardless of race, religion, or creed. Your supermarket, a neutral service provider. And your credit card company is also supposed to be a neutral service provider. Well, certainly PayPal, which is a payment service, right? You use PayPal to pay your bills. That's supposed to be a neutral service provider. But one of the things that we have seen from an increasingly authoritarian left is the attempt to use all of these neutral service providers as bottlenecks that restrict your ability to speak freely, as ways to crack down on the undesirables in the opinion community. We've seen this before. We've seen credit card companies, for example, say that you're not allowed to use their credit cards in order to purchase guns. Right? This has become a major issue in the United States. You've also seen places like Amazon Web Services deplatform Parler. Amazon Web Services is a neutral service provider. In the aftermath of January 6th, you saw Amazon Web Services, at the behest of Democrats, crack down on Parler and kick it off its platform. It was removed from Google. It was removed from Apple Store. It was removed nearly everywhere by the tech companies. Again, all of which were supposed to be neutral service providers. This is the big debate over big tech. Big tech, Facebook, is supposed to be a neutral service provider. It is not supposed to crack down on you on the basis of your ideology. Now, there are folks on the left who suddenly become free market libertarians when it comes to this stuff, treating neutral service providers as though they are basically the Daily Wire, right? They can make whatever call they want about what content they can and cannot engage in. And technically, that's true. These are not government agencies. But when you have neutral service providers that overtly decide that they're going to crack down on particular points of view, this is very bad for the country. And we are allowed to point out that this is very bad for the country, especially because we do have anti-discrimination law in this country. It applies to race. It applies to religion. It now applies to sexual orientation. The one thing it does not apply to is politics. Right? Neutral service providers generally are allowed to deny you service on the basis of your politics. The problem is, of course, the left has politicized every single thing. Right? Everything is political. So if you say, if you're a baker, you say, I don't want to bake this cake for this same-sex wedding, they'll say, you are doing this not on the basis of politics. You're doing this not on the basis of worldview. You're doing this on the basis of animus. But if a baker says, I'm not going to bake a cake for your biblical party, then the idea is that's politics. So everything that the left wants to censor goes in the politics basket, and everything that the left wants to force you to do goes in the immutable characteristic basket that you're not allowed to discriminate against. So the left's categories break down into the stuff you're not allowed to discriminate against and the stuff you are allowed to discriminate against. Everything that is remotely conservative goes in the things you're allowed to discriminate against basket. Everything else goes in the things you're not allowed to discriminate against basket. So when we talk about neutral service providers, increasingly, neutral service providers will not discriminate on the basis of anything except for conservative politics. Okay, this is why the story that is now coming out about PayPal and the Anti-Defamation League is scary. So the Anti-Defamation League used to be a much more bipartisan, it was always a left-leaning organization, but it was sort of a bipartisan organization, largely focused on fighting anti-Semitism that was broadened out to include discrimination of all sorts. Now the Anti-Defamation League is basically a Democratic front group, unfortunately. The Anti-Defamation League, in the aftermath of Abe Foxman's retirement, has basically become a sort of talking points organization for the left in a similar way to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Right? The basic idea of the ADL is that you have to focus deeply in anytime there is a Republican who does something anti-Semitic. This is worthy of unending scorn and ridicule. Fair enough. But if you've got the squad in the Democratic Party saying overtly anti-Semitic stuff for years on end, this is stuff that requires maybe a little bit of tutting, but at that point you sort of let it go. In any case, the Anti-Defamation League is now working with PayPal, a neutral service provider, in order to crack down on content. And they say that they're cracking down on extremist content. The problem, of course, is that the left has a really, really bad habit. And that habit is conflating everything they don't like with extremist content. In the same way that the January 6th Commission is largely going to be about conflating all Republican and conservative ideology with January 6th and saying that if you supported Donald Trump in 2020, it's because you wanted January 6th to happen. Or, by the way, even if you thought that the election was decided by fraud, that makes you a January 6th compatriot. Okay, like I don't agree that November 4th was decided by fraud. I think that Trump lost the election. But there is even a distinction between the people who went and protested that day and the people who actually committed the criminal act of going onto the Capitol grounds, breaking in and threatening people. Okay, but the left wants to wrap all of this up in a ball. In the same way what the left would like to do is broaden out the rubric of extremism, dangerous speech, dangerous incitement, to include pretty much everybody on the right. And now they're going to weaponize neutral service providers in order to basically excise you from the community of people who get to participate in the services of a neutral service provider. So according to the Anti-Defamation League, here is their press release yesterday. And this is dangerous, dangerous stuff, because this is going to be the model going forward. You've seen this increasingly. Advertisers are being told you can advertise with MSNBC, you can't advertise with Fox News. You have Democrats who are openly pushing the FCC to crack down on dissemination of channels like Fox News. You saw NPR last week trying to push Facebook to deplatform Daily Wire for no reason other than we're conservative, right? They said we don't lie. They said that we don't engage in conspiracy theories. They said that we're openly conservative and we should be suppressed anyway. The goal here is to take businesses, again, which are not subject to First Amendment restrictions because they're businesses, and through both governmental and social pressure, get them to bottleneck free speech. That's the goal here. So here's the ADL's press release. Quote, PayPal Holdings, in partnership with ADL, today announced a new partnership initiative to fight extremism and hate through the financial industry and across at-risk communities. This is the latest effort by PayPal in combating racism, hate, and extremism across its platforms and the industry. Through this collaboration, PayPal and ADL have launched a research effort to address the urgent need to understand how extremism and hate movements throughout the United States are attempting to leverage financial platforms to fund criminal activity. Okay, so if we're talking about how PayPal should not be engaged in criminal activity or should be restricting its ability restricting the ability of people to use their platform to engage in criminal activity, fine. We have those sorts of regulations with regard to all sorts of financial transactions. Or we have those regulations put in place, many of them, directly after 9/11. This is why if you're transferring over $10,000, for example, you need to have basically a delay and the federal government checks into it and all of that. Okay, but that's not the entirety of what PayPal and the ADL are doing. According to Aaron Karsmer, the Chief Risk Officer and EVP of Risk and Platforms at PayPal, quote, by identifying partners across sectors with common goals and complementary resources, we can make an even greater impact than any of us could do on our own. We're excited to partner with the ADL, other nonprofits, and law enforcement in our fight against hate in all of its forms. So, first of all, I am very uneasy with the rubric of, quote, hate in all of its forms, because as we have seen, many on the left perceive anything on the right to be hateful that they disagree with. Right? If you believe, for example, that men are men and women are women, this means that you're a hate monger, according to the left, and you should be suppressed. So I have some real difficulty in the language here. If they want to say we're cracking down on criminality, that's not even worthy of a press release. Right? That's what you should be doing. Businesses should, of course, always be fighting criminality and illegality, but that's not what we're talking about here, as becomes pretty clear as this press release goes on. The initiative with PayPal will be led through ADL's Center on Extremism, a leading authority on extremism, terrorism, and hate. PayPal and ADL will focus on uncovering and disrupting the financial pipelines that support extremist and hate movements. In addition to extremist and anti-government organizations, the initiative will focus, on actors and networks spreading and profiting from all forms of hate and bigotry against any community. Now we're getting kind of broad, aren't we? We went from people engaging in criminal activity or people associated with criminal organizations to focusing on, quote, actors and networks spreading and profiting from all forms of hate and bigotry against any community. Now, again, this makes me very uneasy because I do not think that the left is particularly circumspect in how they approach questions of hate and bigotry. As we have seen, the President of the United States, this doddering old quote-unquote moderate, has spent the last several months declaring that if you're in favor of voter ID, it's because you're akin to a Jim Crow racist. So no, I don't think that the ADL has any monopoly on defining hate and bigotry. I think the left has a horrific habit of declaring everyone they dislike a hateful bigot. And I don't think they have any restrictive principles here at all. So you put that on top of PayPal, and now PayPal says, okay, well, you want to subscribe to Daily Wire, or you want to subscribe to Daily Caller, or you want to subscribe to Fox Nation? Well, you know what they've been doing over there. Now, Tucker Carlson, white supremacist, Ben Shapiro, hate monger. Well, I guess we can't use your platform anymore in order to, you can see where this is going, and it is nowhere good. Again, if you are attempting to crack down on criminal activity, I got no problem at all. The nice thing about criminal activity is it's a bright line, because criminal activity has statutorily defined terms. That is not the case with hate and bigotry. It's why we don't prosecute hate and bigotry in the United States the way they attempt to in Europe or Canada, which is a very good thing. We should not prosecute hate and bigotry in the United States because it is a fungible term. It is an empty vessel that you can fill with anyone you don't like. Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the ADL, says, quote, all of us, including in the private sector, have a critical role to play in fighting the spread of extremism and hate. With this new initiative, we're setting a new standard for companies to bring their expertise to critical social issues. We have a unique opportunity to further understand how hate spreads and develop key insights that will inform the efforts of the financial industry, law enforcement, and our communities in mitigating extremist threats. According to the press release, PayPal and ADL will work closely with organizations like the United Latin American Centers to protect marginalized communities against extremism. They will work closely with them to share trends and hate with marginalized and vulnerable communities, and with the goal of helping to empower and safeguard those communities which are frequently targets of hate groups and extremist acts. So you can see how this is going to bleed from, here's a group that participates in criminal activity, we should crack down on that, to here are the kinds of people that members of this group might like to watch. And let's stop them. And you can no longer patronize those sites. The militarization of neutral service providers in order to avoid the strictures of the First Amendment is a deep and abiding problem in American life. There are only two possible remedies. One is actual regulation that adds discrimination on the basis of politics to anti-discrimination law, which is, I think, the way a lot of states are going to go. Now that we've created a whole rubric of anti-discrimination law, much of which is in violation of basic First Amendment principles, by the way. Right? You can be against discrimination and also recognize that anti-discrimination law really, really impedes on freedom of association as well as freedom of speech. Right? Both things can be true at once. That racism is terrible, and also in the United States, you do have a right to say racist things. Both of those things can be true at once. In the same way that in the United States, I think pornography is terrible, and still, the Supreme Court has declared that you have the right to buy pornography if you're an adult. Right? Just because there is a quote-unquote right to do something does not mean that you always approve of the use of the right. However, if we are going to have an anti-discrimination rubric in the United States, and we are going to say it's not okay to discriminate against people on the basis of everything from identifying as a member of the opposite sex to race, like that entire broad spectrum, then the notion the only people who can be discriminated against are white conservatives seems to be a bit of a problem. You're going to see states fight back against that. That's one possibility. The other is we're just going to get two separate sets of service providers, one for conservatives and one for liberals. And listen, we here on the right, I'm happy to make money off of that. You know, because if there's going to be a right-wing PayPal, I'm happy to found it, and I'm happy to have people use it. It's fine with me. I'll make a lot of money. It is horrible for the country. As neutral spaces disappear, we have no relationship with the people who live next door to us. And that means the further polarization and split in the country, all of which I talk about in the new book, The Authoritarian Moment, but it is a deep problem. It's getting worse every single day. The battle for the culture is heating up. We here at the Daily Wire are making some big moves. So be sure to like, subscribe, ring that bell, because you're not going to want to miss a single moment.